Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Siti Nurul Quratul Aini and my ID number is 20906039. In here I want to explain about translation theory before the 20th century. The introduction. Translation theory before the 20th century. The aim of this chapter is not to comprehension history or translation or translator talk the a case. This would be beyond the scope of any books. Instead, the main focus in the central recurritum of word for word and sentence for sentence translation. Adapt the dominant much of translation theory in which Newmark. The prelinguistic period of translation. In this chapter, we focus on a select few of the readily available writing based on the criterion of the influence they have exerted on the history of translation theory and research. And next, word for word or sentence for sentence. The interpret of the first line is often read by translation study as being the alliteration. Word for word, translator will the author try to produce a speech that move the letters. Point out that in ancient Rome it was the low social status of the interprets, a mediator or various kids. That was different because of a lack of education. This then led to limit and pedantic understanding and to an intelligent word-for-word Latin style. Their points were to encourage the work of the great Christian translator and commentator to summarize their changes involved. Number one, coping with the flexibility of Saint Christian text by reversing to a standard tense order, and number two, the enhancement of the literariness of the ST to adapt to an elegant style, and number three, the omission of repetitive exclamation, and number four, the reduction in the pretextual commentaries that accompany the TTS, and the last one, reduction or restructuring to ensure more logical and linear discourse. And the next, humanist and the Protestant Reformation. Language and translation become the stage of a huge power struggle. Latin, controlled by the Church in Rome, had a stranglehold over knowledge and religion until changed by the European humanist movement of the 14th and 15th centuries. The revolution in Bible translation practice in Europe was galvanized by humanist advance in the study and knowledge of the Greek and Hebrew and of classical scholarship. Its culmination was Erasmus' edition of a parallel Latin New Testament that was used by both Tyndale and Luther. The general climate of the Reformation and the new technology of the printing press mean that Bible translation dominates book production. Fidelity, spirit, and truth. The concept of fidelity, or at least the translator who was fiduci interprets, e.i. the faithful interpreter, had initially been dismissed as literal. Word for word translation B. Horach describe spirit as similarly having two meanings. The Latin word spiritus denotes creative energy or inspiration proper to literature, but St. Augustine used it to mean the Holy Spirit of good, and his contemporary St. Jerome's employed it in both sentences. For St. Augustine, spirit and thought, Latin various, a very intuit note with track having the sentence of context. For St. Jerome, track means the authentic biblical text to which the he returned in this Latin Vulgate translation. In this preface to his translation of Ovid's epistles, Diron education translation to their categories. Number one, metaprose, word by word and line by line translation which correspond to literal translation. And number two, paraphrase, translation with latitude where the author is kept in view by the translator so as never to be lost, but his words are not strictly followed as his sentence. This involves change words, phrases, and more or less correspond to faithful or sentence for sentence translation. And the last one, number three, the imitation for sacking, but word and sentence these correspond to culturally very free translation and is more or less what today might be understood as adaptation. And five principles in order of importance as follow. Number one, the translation must perfectly understand the sentence and material of the original author, although he seeks sought validly to clarify obscurities. And number two, the translator should have a perfect knowledge of both SL and TL so as not to lessen the majesty of the language. Number three, the translations should avoid word for words rhetorics. And number four, the translation should avoid Latinate and unusual forms. And the last one, the translator should assemble and liaise words eloquently to avoid clumsiness. And the land has few principal Tyler EBID has their general laws or rules. Number one, the translation should give a complete transcript of the idea of the original work. And number two, the style and manner of writing should be of the same character with that of the original. And number three, the translation should have all the ease of the original composition. And there are several consequences of the approach including. And number one, if the translation is to seek to communicate the same impression which he or she receive from the IST, the impression will also depend on the level of education and understanding among the TT readership, and this is likely to differ from the translation on understanding. And number two, a special language of translation may be necessary. For example, compensating in one page with imaginative word. What else would the translator has to make do with a hackney experience that cannot convey the impression of the foreign? And that's all from me. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.